Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Forbes Middle East second annual Building the Future Summit. I'm Ramia Faraj and I'm so honored to be your host today. I'd like to thank everyone from our distinguished speakers to our online viewers for making the time to be with us. We're really excited to bring together some of the most successful developers, construction giants, consultants, banks, and travel and hospitality experts to discuss the various topics that are shaping the post-pandemic world. These changing times have resulted in a strategic realignment of priorities across industries, and we're going to learn a lot more about them today. The program has been designed to highlight innovation as well as the outlook for critical sectors. We have three insightful panels ahead of us and a lineup of incredible speakers, and we're really looking forward to hearing from each and every one of them. Our first panel today looks at the uncertainty still surrounding the post-COVID future of the real estate and construction sectors in the Middle East. It will highlight the unprecedented ways that these sectors have been affected by the pandemic and the evolution that's currently underway. Here we'll discuss everything from devaluation and the drawbacks of energy-intensive buildings to the emerging need for sustainability and digital leaps for healthier and safer buildings. Our lineup of speakers will discuss the macro fundamentals playing a major role in investment decisions, how the sector is being reimagined, and how it will be reinvented in the future. I take great pleasure in introducing Mazen Issam Hawa, Vice Chairman and Group CEO of the United Real Estate Company KSCP, Kez Taylor, CEO of Alec Engineering and Contracting, Tarek Chauhan, Group CEO of EFS Facilities Services Management, Chris Wan, Head of Design Management at Masdar City. And it's my absolute pleasure to be the moderator for this session. Thank you so much for joining us today. Mazen, I'd like to start by asking you how exactly the retail and the construction sector have evolved in terms of developing human-centered urban spaces, and what impact has COVID had on this evolution?
First, thank you, Ramya, and Forbes Middle East for inviting us today to share our experience and insights into the industry and the experience that we've went through in the past couple of years. And as we all know, in real estate, it's all about continuous learning, and hence it's an opportunity to learn from all the esteemed guests as well. There's no doubt that 2021 were perhaps the most challenging years for the real estate and the construction industry. And the situation we faced was unprecedented and presented unprecedented challenges. Challenges that were multifaceted, from financial to operational, with a slowdown in operations, and of course challenges into the supply chain, as we've also witnessed an increase in the construction costs. And as per GLL, construction costs alone in 2021 have increased by close to 6%. And this have compelled us as developers and the industry players to look for solutions and alternative methods to address these challenges. But at the same time, I mean, we at URC, we look at the positive side. With challenges, opportunities emerge. And for example, part of the challenges that, of course, we faced in the shopping centers on the retail side, with the consecutive curfews, the shutdowns, it compelled us to take a breather, focus on what are the value attributes of our investments. And we've seen shifting trends, for example, where retailers were looking for alternative methods or channels for sales. So this called us to rethink our approach from a owner of property where we're leasing to tenants to focus on what actually will maintain and sustain the value for our shopping centers and malls, and think of the end user and basically the consumer, and what are the values that actually matters for the consumer in order to drive the traffic into our properties. And accordingly, of course, we were focusing more on the experience post opening, and providing the consumer with a better experience
and I think you really are. I think you really are doing that through your Hessa District project in Kuwait. And I want to ask you about that project in just a few moments' time. But I'd like to turn to Kez now for a moment. Kez, I mean, you've been in charge of ALEC Engineering for 20 years. So can you testify that 10 years ago, sustainable buildings was kind of a novelty, whereas today it's becoming the norm?
Yeah, 100% right. So I think 10 years ago, it was a nice to have. I think moving into the future, I think what all of us need to try and do is align to the objectives of the COP26 goals. So collectively, what we all got to try and do is reduce our carbon emissions over the next 5 years by 50%. And we've got to think very carefully about how we're going to actually achieve that. So we also got to figure out how do we actually measure carbon. And I don't think there's really a standardized method at the moment. But if you just think about it, if we can reduce the amount of people that we have on a project, that's a lot less people that are actually driving to work, getting on buses, etc. in just the movement of people. So it's, we've got to try and figure out everything right the way through the whole process, from design to the number of people that are required. And collectively, we got to figure out how do we reduce our carbon emissions by 50% over the next 5 years. And that's quite a tough thing to achieve.
And Kez, taking all of that into consideration, what's your outlook for the regional real estate and the construction sectors? Okay,
so I think if we look at the UAE, I think people have realized that the UAE is a very desirable place to live. We're very fortunate. We've got fantastic, innovative, forward-thinking leadership. The infrastructure is fantastic. And I think more and more people are going to get attracted to the region. So I think what's going to be happening here on the real estate side is, in line with global trends, we're going to see increased urbanization. We're going to see continued population growth. And with that comes all the challenges of how do we actually deliver all of these projects that are going to get required in the future that are going to be desirable to the next generation.
And this brings me to Chris. Chris, heading design at Masdar City. From a design perspective, how smart and how resilient are the buildings at Masdar City, and what steps are you taking to ensure that they are actually future-proofed?
Thank you for inviting me to this session. I think this is a very timely conversation. And then moving on to the project I'm involved with, the Masdar City project. The Masdar City project, the road to sustainability, started over a decade ago. And one of the advantages of that is that we have a lot of learning along the way. It's interesting to me that a lot of the principles of sustainability, when we started it, as Kez mentioned, a lot of it you could perceive as nice to have, but they're becoming very, very relevant today, not only in relationship to the COP26, but also with living through the current pandemic. Having said that, what's clear to us is that sustainability, when you break it down to its pillars of economic, environmental, and social sustainability, is kind of a starting point. And by that, I mean, when you solve the sustainability equation, that is not where you want to end up to be, especially with the current awareness that is going on. There's several factors I like to bring into this from a design perspective. What we have found over time is that there is simplicity in approach to deal with sustainability is oftentimes the best approach, because at the end of the day, we're living in a live market. We are part of the Abu Dhabi real estate, and the simplicity combined with sustainability approach also lends itself to very effective market products that demonstrate a sustainable building can compete competitively within the financial markets. So when we move on from that, it's always interesting to me that we instinctively know a good building when we walk into one, right? And when you're looking at the light, the air, the space, the whole experience. And that is what I mean when sustainability moves forward. It is to us about the relationship of the people and the space and the environment that you actually work in or live in, as the case may be. And this is the connection of the mind and the space. And so with the better understanding of the relationships of people in space, especially with all this work at home and people working at home, healthy mind is really important to us. The mind needs to be ready to engage. So Mazda City is embarking into the future to assist smart and resilient outcomes, understanding these relationships of instilling buildings that are good for the mind, body, and soul at the same time.
Tariq, I'd like to ask you, how successfully has EFS implemented sustainability mandates to really support the community?
I would like to talk about first, we are on the receiving end when it comes to after the building is finished, we are given to maintain the building. Now, the standards that are currently coming with COP26 guidelines and various others are sometimes such that the way the buildings are built, they are not designed to the standards in context to the newly standards that are established from the COP26 or various other sustainability initiatives that are currently being talked about. So we got
So how are you ensuring that the standards aren't compromised?
The standards are compromised. For example, there are very fewer standards when it comes to facility management. Facility management primarily follows either the local standards or the global OEM standards when it comes to maintaining assets. When it comes to infrastructure, we have some standards, but more what we do is that we evolve over the period of time based on conditional assets and others. How do we maintain the assets of the building? In the current scenario, we are complying with most of the standards that are locally established out here. However, we are looking now to evolve upon with the new COP26 and various others to build new standards. So as of today, EFS across the built environments is managing most of the assets as per the new standards. But when it comes to evolving standards, I assume we need to do a lot of homework. And developers, consultants, regulators, each one has to come with the new guidelines, because I don't think the current built environments have taken into account the evolving standards that are required.
So there is a challenge meeting ESG compliance. Is this what you're saying?
See, yes, there are challenges on it at the moment. When it comes to green chemicals, when it comes to sustainable use of machines, the new machine automation is coming. We're trying to take into account all that in order to meet the least footprint, carbon footprint. But when it comes to energy, especially the utilities and the air conditioning and others, we've got a limited control on that. If we are managing leased environments, then the landlord controls that part of the building. We are also having challenges with the district cooling and others because we have a limited control on that. So wherever the facility management controls the larger MEP assets, we can definitely control 15 to 17% of the cost. But when it comes to light, when it comes to many other COP26 measures, that is more to deal with the design. And unfortunately, at the design stage, FM inputs are very limited role of FM is taken into account. Hopefully, with the new situations evolving, FM will have a much bigger role to play in that.
Okay, Mazen, I'd like to come back to you. I'd like to chat a little bit about Hessa District, your project in Kuwait. How are you designing this project to meet the changing lifestyle needs of its residents and people within the community?
I mean, traditionally, if you allow me to talk about urbanization, developments in general, traditionally cities were developed around epicenters of services, businesses, and amenities. And of course, in some cities, when the epicenter is non-existent, then it results in random urban development. Through the Hissa Mubarak project, we are actually developing the community focused on the consumer at the epicenter. So basically, we're then our development strategy is driven by developing the services around the community development. In the Gulf and the North Africa region, the majority of the population or the rising population are young people, and young people are well educated, tech savvy, quite demanding in terms of a modern type of lifestyle. And accordingly, they also like to live with others. They don't like to live alone. And accordingly, the URC strategy in terms of development is to develop communities. Hissa Mubarak itself is a well-developed mixed-use residential and commercial development that is focused on providing a new lifestyle or the rethinking of a lifestyle for the consumer. The demand post the pandemic had been, of course, very, very strong. That was driven by, of course, the 2 years of, or the more than 1 year suspension of operation or business, and people were, of course, preserving their cash. And with the rising demand, because it is a young population, Kuwait actually is a young population that is actually the majority of the population, more than 50% is actually young, below 30. And accordingly, the demand was very strong, but also had been focused on what are the values that we provide them. And by focusing on providing the consumer, or focusing on the consumer epicenter, we're allowing the customer or the residential customer to build their ecosystem around their communities. We have introduced this through providing, by launching office spaces and office development, in which we're providing for the first time the opportunity for small and medium-sized enterprises and professional end users to own or invest in their own offices, smaller size of units, and providing them, of course, proximity to where they live, and allow them to enjoy this concept of live, work, and have leisure within a open community development.
And those are the characteristics of a true mixed-use district: live, work, learn, and play. Isn't that right, Mazen?
Yeah, absolutely. And,
so you speak of these young consumers, and these are the people who 5 years ago were shocked at having to pay a 5 fil surcharge for their plastic grocery bags. But now they've become sustainable. And I'd like to ask Ken, how will sustainability mandates align to address these modern consumer demands?
From a construction point of view?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so I think, on the construction front, I mean, what we're trying to do as a business is we got to figure out how do we deliver projects more efficiently with modern methods of construction. And what we're focusing towards is that there's a lot less skilled people that want to get into construction moving into the future. So what we're moving towards is that, for instance, in residential, we're moving towards modular housing that is manufactured in a controlled environment in a factory. So in theory, you can manufacture a house in a controlled environment. We're setting it up in such a way that it is stackable and could be a high-rise building up to 50 floors, and in theory can be transported globally anywhere in the world. So we see construction moving towards we got a lot of people working on a project to a lot less people that's working in a very sustainable, efficient, modern methods of construction, kind of a sequence using modular construction. So we see that's where construction is going to go.
Public spaces are often dominated by cars and skyscrapers rather than green space. And I would like to ask Ken what elements in the city planning of Masdar is improving the quality of life really for residents there.
With regards to Masdar City, in terms of public spaces, it's really, really interesting because in the original master plan, which we are still continuing today to develop, the whole idea of the public spaces, courtyards and streets were heavily pedestrianized as an approach. And the reason at that time was to bring the buildings closer together. It's easier to walk in between buildings. And the idea was to reduce the reliance on public transportation, right? And it's about resource efficiency. Moving on to the current context and relationship to wellness and health, we find it very interesting that it's known out there that you're less likely to be infected by COVID-19 if you're outdoors than you're indoors. So there's this kind of push for outdoor space. People are moving from apartment buildings to villa buildings where you have gardens. When you reflect this into city planning, what we're finding at Masdar City are the public space that we have created that are car-free and walkable are becoming more used. And this is right in line with the original city planning concept where we aim to try and make these public spaces as comfortable as possible. So we found that this kind of evolution where sustainable design is resilient and does persist, and we'll continue to concentrate to optimize those spaces. And I work at Masdar City myself, and it's very interesting to see actually people are moving out of offices and actually working inside the courtyards with their laptops. So there's a future development where there's a shift to outdoors.
So you're saying that the pandemic has actually impacted your business designs, or these were pre-pandemic designs that resulted in the current structure of Masdar?
Pre-pandemic design ideas, but they have been given a new life due to the pandemic, not only because of the walkability and resource efficiency, but the whole idea of outdoor wellness, right? And the ability to be outside. All our F&B facilities open to the outdoor spaces, that many of them open to the courtyard spaces, which are totally car-free. And so original design concepts were valid then and they're valid today, even though for slightly different reasons. So they are sort of all-encompassing.
Tariq, I would like to just go a little bit into the life cycle management of the buildings, particularly the buildings in the Middle East. What role will data play in the future of maintenance of these buildings?
I think building life cycle management is something which is one of the biggest challenges most FM companies are facing at the moment. And there is legacy issues due to the issues concerning during the construction life cycle. There are many misses. And then eventually when we land up with commissioning and DLP maintenance, at that time also the handover processes are not completed. So we are unfortunately against a very bad data that is usually given to us. So if I look at from a legacy issues amongst we manage close to about 50 to 60 million square meters of FM space across 23 countries. And we definitely have a footprint in some of the largest projects in this region. I will say that 2/3 of these projects, we do come across a significant challenge in terms of right data. We in fact have to really calculate and reformat the data. And then you also require a good CAFM solution, a good platform which can eventually calculate this data. A conditional survey is done in the right format, and then we follow the standards. And eventually then only you can accomplish the highest, I'm talking the impact of FM can only be accomplished if the right data is there. So I would once again say, yes, data is very, very critical. And not only at the conditional survey stage, asset uploading and tagging, even the entire preventive plant maintenance, needs to be captured in a right format. The breakdowns have to be clearly between CapEx and OpEx. All these data has to be provided for this data to be churned to eventually build a sustainable FM regime. So data is very, very critical. And this data is not only in asset management now with the way the soft services is evolving, the way the IFM is evolving to the next level, data is becoming critical everywhere. And hopefully companies and the various players take seriousness of this issue to how to protect the integrity of data and ensure that the data is just not only captured, but it is also analysis is done in order to create futuristic, better decisions for future facility management.
So that the data is put to good use.
It has to be made to a good use.
I'd like to ask Kez about the major obstacles from an engineering and a contracting point of view that you've been facing throughout the pandemic, and how can they be addressed?
You know, one of the issues that we have is around the regulators and the authorities. So, you know, the authorities need to align to these sustainable objectives that everyone is trying to achieve moving into the future. So, if we don't align the authorities, even if we come up with great ideas around sustainability, if the regulators are behind us in terms of where we're trying to get to, it's pretty difficult for us to achieve those goals. So I think one of the things that we need to do, and often what you're finding in regulators is that they're not as forward thinking often as perhaps the private industry is. So we're almost operating in a misaligned manner. And I think if we can get the authorities to align with our objectives, we got a much higher probability of achieving better sustainable goals moving into the future.
So where exactly are you not receiving the support, Kez, rather?
I think from a developer's perspective, you know, if you think about, so they will have rules around a minimum size of apartment that you're allowed to have. They've got rules around the amount of parking bays that you have to have in a development for every square meter of livable space. But if we look at future trends, the kids of the future don't really want to own cars. They don't want to have a parking garage. They don't necessarily want to live in a one-bedroom apartment that's 50 square meters big. What they want to do is they want to live in a really well-designed and efficient floor space that is cost-effective with very good community kind of features. So trends are changing, but the regulators are not aligned to where the trends are moving. So I think that's a big constraint, and I think it's a bit of a global issue.
That's fascinating. Now, we all know that sustainability, it's not altruistic, it makes good business sense. And Ken, I would like to know, I mean, how does Masdar City kind of work this into its future planning? I mean, is sustainability an altruistic endeavor for Masdar, or is it meant to be profitable?
Masdar City is part of an investment company, right? So we believe and we strive for that all our buildings that we put together at the end of the day, they actually comply with all three pillars of sustainability, not only social and environmental, but it has to make economic sense as well, because there's a belief that you have to make it make economic sense, and that's the way to make the whole sustainability movement go viral, so to speak, and get everyone to move in the same direction. So we do understand there are many barriers to this, and that's what we do. We address these barriers and find ways to overcome them, and find ways to work with and overcome regulatory issues. And these management of barriers, right, to design and develop is what Masdar City is all about. So within that framework, on a practical level, we aim to kind of optimize all fronts of sustainability with this existing framework, proof of concept, buildings are built, people move and experience them, and that also can work as a shift when working with authorities. And we do have many discussions with authorities to help work together. It takes time, that's the practical reality, but these are necessary steps that one has to go through. So in terms of Mazar City and sustainability, I want to come back to this issue that there are a number of qualities, and back to my original point that sustainability is a starting point. I think in these sessions already, one talks about human-centric design and mixed-use planning, and these ideas are also very central to us. Sustainability is a starting point. At the end of the day, we have to build places and build communities, and what the difference at Mazar City is that we're doing all these things, having all these walkable districts. You can walk to work and walk to all your communities, have great public spaces, but with the sustainability and the resource efficiency and the low carbon emission moving towards zero carbon overlays at the same time.
I'd like to say a big thank you to all of our panelists who contributed to this second annual Building the Future Summit. We really do appreciate the insights that you shared with us today. Wishing you all the very best from the entire team at Forbes Middle East, and looking forward to seeing you in person soon. Please make sure to follow us on social media.